So I sat down with Pam Tenaerts, Chief Scientific Officer of Medable. It was such an interesting conversation to hear about her early career as a physician in Belgium, how she met Rob Califf along the way and joined Duke, her time at City, her role at Medable. I really loved the part of the conversation about her time as a serious volleyball player and how that inspired her leadership journey. I hope that you enjoy this episode. And Pam, great to see you. Welcome to the Leaders and Legends podcast.
Thank you for having me. This is such an honor. I really appreciate it.
Oh, well, we're going to dive right in because I have a feeling this time is going to go by super fast. And, I really wanted to start this conversation by hearing about your origin story, and what it was like growing up in Belgium and, what your parents do. I kind of think that like early family experiences sort of form a person and have a link to leadership. And so love to start there.
Great. So, as you mentioned, I grew up in Belgium. I am the second of four girls, and my mother is German. My dad met my mom when he was in the military in Germany. Well, Belgian military with places in Germany. And so we grew up right next to Brussels in it's outside of the ring road, but it's very contiguous with Brussels. So it's not like there's a split between. And it was an area where I grew up speaking Flemish. So in Belgium, there's a bit of a friction between Flemish speaking and French speaking people. And so in our town, we spoke very much Flemish. And then when you had to go into Brussels, you had to speak French because they didn't really know any Flemish. And I grew up pretty idyllically. We could walk to school, ride our bikes to school. We were lucky to be next to a really good school. And I went to school in Belgium, you start at 2.5 in kindergarten. And I went to the same school all the way through high school. And it was a nun school, all girls. So they had really good sports programs. And I ended up playing volleyball. And that was like my life, playing volleyball at the time. And additionally, I don't think I ever wanted to be anything else but a doctor when I grew up. Like from a small kid, I always wanted to be a doctor. And in my family, people hadn't really gone to college. My dad didn't go to college, his brother did. And so my older sister and I were the first ones to go to college. And my mother, having come from Germany, she had a degree over there, but it didn't count in Belgium. She was very much, you have to study, you have to be able to work, be by yourself. You cannot depend on you don't want to depend on a husband. You can lead your own life. So she was very much instilling independence and, like you can do your own thing. We'll always be proud of you kind of a situation.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And do you think that that was your mother's influence that sort of got the idea of becoming a doctor in your head? That's interesting because a lot of times people who go into medical school, they're kind of following in their parents' footsteps in a way.
Not at all, not at all. And because I was very involved in extracurricular activities. I studied well, clearly, but I wasn't a focus of mine. And so people actually kind of assumed I wouldn't be able to, but it was just whatever I focused on, I was able to do. So, yeah.
So talk to me about how you sort of went from medical school to the States and, kind of your professional journey. Tie that together for me.
So after medical school, I did general medicine. So I got a practice in a town close to my parents' house where my great-grandfather actually had a big Belgian endive farm. So my practice was on the corner of a street with my name on it and the other street. So they knew my name, and that was part of this that was something I found really odd, that as a family doctor in a town, people knew who you were. I mean, I'm a shy person typically in big groups, and it felt very strange to me. And I remember distinctly thinking, and that you I mean you have to be nice, right? But people paid attention to when you were in town if you waved at them in the car.
Right.
And sometimes I felt like the Pope. I know that sounds horrible, but like, like
No, I love
waving
it.
at waving at people. And I thought, this is so odd. And I was 25 at the time. Am I going to be doing this for the rest of my life? Like, am I going to be in this town for the rest of my life? And at one point I decided, no, I don't think that this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And we were still close to the university town, where one of the professors had posted an ad for somebody who spoke multiple languages and wanted to travel. And that's all I knew about the job. I'm like, wow, that sounds interesting. Like, you need to be a physician. And so I ended up interviewing with the head of cardiology at the time. And the position he was interviewing for was to be the international coordinator for a big cardiology study, for which Eric Topol and Rob Califf were the PIs of the study in the US at Duke.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so,
Okay, I'm starting to see the connection here.
yeah, and then
Yeah.
at the end of the interview, he was, "Do you want to come to the faculty club tonight? The Americans are in town." And
The Americans.
literally, that's what he said. And he already had me at faculty club, because in Belgium, our faculty club was in a beguinage from the 1500s. And it was rumored to
my
be really
gosh.
nice, but as a student, you couldn't get into it. So I was like, yes, I'll go. I'll do that. And I sat next to Rob Califf that night, and next to people that are still my friends to this day. Yeah. And so that's how it kind of got started.
That's amazing. Well, I want to talk about Medable, but first I want to go back to volleyball, because I did read that about you, that you were really a great volleyball player. And, I mean, I think sports and playing sports is sort of like training ground for leadership. And can you talk about, your like athletic background, and do you see a link between playing at sort of a high level and the work you're doing now?
I do. And I think where I see the link is this. I mean, there's the quest to win, right? You want to be better than your opponent. But what I think is even more interesting to me is how and different sports have different angles to this, but in volleyball, you're a team. The whole team has to do well for you to win. So it's not like necessarily one person driving it, but it's the whole team that has to work together. And I think I've liked collaborative things. We met when I was at City. So, I like the collaboration and how a group comes up with better things than an individual in most instances. There's some geniuses clearly, but but most of the time when something happens, when magic happens when people come together from diverse backgrounds. And in a volleyball team, it was sort of similar, because you needed tall people, and you needed fast people, and you needed agile people. And it's like everybody brought something different to the team. And without some of the tallest people were not the fastest, so they couldn't quite work in the back. In the back of the what do you call that in English? I don't know. The field, I guess. I don't know. So it was like all these different skills that come together. And I think that is what I like about clinical research, because it always is about different things that have to come together just right for the study to work. And that has taken on new meanings. I've been in clinical research ever since then. I've done different things. When I came to City, I started realizing that it wasn't just the clinical teams that needed to come together. It was patients needed to be at the table, sites needed to be at the table, regulators needed to be at the table. And it's when all that came together, like that cocktail produces really good things and, avoids mistakes to happen to begin with.
Yeah. Well, tell me, what drew you to Medable? Tell me about that journey. And
Right.
because it's a very different organization compared to places you've worked in the past, right?
For sure. I think what drew me to Medable was a combination of things. First of all, Medable became a city member like in the 2016-17 era. So they had been involved in city. And I think what was interesting is when I came to the Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative, regulators wanted us to work on technology. And we had a system at City to prioritize projects, and the membership had a big word in what was prioritized. And they never said this is not important. Oftentimes what came up is this is too hard, kind of a discussion why it then was deprioritized. And in 2015, the regulator said, no, FDA is a co-founder of City as a public-private partnership. We'll ask you to do this. No questions asked. Now we're going to do it. And we ended up doing it. It became very clear that technology had the possibility of really changing things, much like it does in the rest of your life, right? It's, your boarding passes, banking. I can't remember the last time I went into a bank, those kind of things that make your life better. And I think I started seeing how technology was really one of the things that people needed to work on to get it right too. So then when Michelle called me and said, hey, what do you think? I was like, wow, this is a really great opportunity. I had the experience of working in a startup situation in some ways before, because that same trial I talked about, that first trial I was participating in, was called the GUSTO trial, Global Utilization of Streptokinase and TPA in Occluded Arteries. And we were...
It's amazing to remember that.
I don't think I'll ever forget GUSTO. GUSTO was one of the milestones in my life. And for clinical trials, I went into that study not knowing much about clinical research, to be honest, and learning a lot. And one of the things I thought was, we were such a small group, and it was basically, while GUSTO was happening, it was sort of the origin study for the Duke Clinical Research Center also. So they started with a small core group and grew from there. So that to me felt like a startup environment, and I knew that I liked that aspect of it.
I see.
So coming to Medable felt a little bit like that. People joining arms and working together to get something hard done in a way that nobody had before. So that was one of the other things that, in addition to knowing that technology was a good thing, also getting back to that environment really attracted me.
Yeah, I love hearing about these connections, with Rob Califf and Duke and City and Medable, and it's really interesting how all of that led to your current role. So you're Chief Scientific Officer. So can you kind of describe what that entails at Medable, and is it mostly an internal job, or are you both internal and external? Talk about that a little bit.
Great. So when I joined Medable, one of the things I wanted to bring to Medable was, for people to adopt something new, there has to be some convincing that happens. And clearly, when I joined in 2021, I want to say we were still in the middle of COVID. It's kind of hard to remember when exactly that came in, but we were still in the middle of COVID. And clearly a lot of people had adopted by necessity, because that was the only way you could still do clinical research. But knowing how things normally go with technology adoption, at some point people are going to need more than this frantic adoption with hairpin and duct tape kind of a thing, because trials were retrofitted with technological elements to be able to continue to do them. And so I think part of then broader adoption is evidence on things like, do these things work in the way we think they do? What do they improve? What do we need to tweak a little bit? And those kind of things. So one of the things I brought is sort of, with my city hat on, an ability to provide evidence around those things. And I was super happy that a project was already started with Ken Getz, and we were doing other things with that. So the evidence part. And then the other part is when you bring in a new system, other workflows have to change a little bit. So the IRB was then a big step, because, ethics committees had a harder time figuring out what they needed to review, what they should have, and then do appropriate discussions for approval, and making sure that people are kept safe and the data is kept, the data is reliable in those systems. So that was a work with MRCT, and then we did some work with Duke still on informed consent. So a lot of the evidence and workflows. Additionally, we have the ECOA department is on my team. So there's a big science part to ECOAs and making sure you do that right. So we have a VP of ECOA, Cindy Howery, who brings in all that experience from having done this for 20 years. So both those roles have internal and external aspects. Cindy is a lot external, clearly with customers, making sure that we're doing the right thing, that the right things are being done for the trial. And then my role is also with external to then present the data on what we have found, talk to customers and sponsors of trials as to what it is that these DCT elements can bring to them, and also learn in return what the evidence is that they still need. Like, what are the things that people aren't sure about that maybe then I can turn into a research project down the line. So it's both internal and external. Yeah.
Okay. And so how would you characterize the level of acceptance now with DCT? I mean, I think I met Michelle at DFARM years ago when Medable won DFARM Idol. And I want to say that was maybe 2017, 2018. And I'm sure COVID just accelerated everything for Medable. But where do you see the industry today as it pertains to DCT and acceptance?
So I think with COVID, there was sort of the requirement for doing something different so that you could at least continue the clinical trials, critical ones that you had. In the back of my head, I've always wondered that while we needed to do it, the data on how it went might not be perfect, because you have to do it in a retrofitted way. You have to do it in an environment where, my God, nothing was normal during that time, right? Like, nothing was normal. Everything was weird. So I'm not sure that, in my opinion, the trials during COVID were the best scorecard for DCTs necessarily, because it wasn't such a wild and sort of frantic way that all of that happened.
Yeah.
I think last year, a lot of people were like, oh my God, DCTs, nobody wants to do them anymore. I don't think that that's right either, but I think now we're getting to a place where there are systems in place to collect data on what the evidence is of what DCT's done. And we've supported Tufts and the PAC consortium to get at some of that some of that data that is operational and otherwise. And what we're sort of seeing is that if you implement DCTs, you beat your planned timelines. So there is an element that goes faster, that maybe during COVID, you could just finish the study and that would have been great, but you wouldn't have gone faster because of all the other elements that were sort of stacked against you. What we're also seeing is that people on average are using 4 elements of any like decentralized module. So I think, the technology adoption with the trough of disillusionment, I think we're getting out of that, and people are clearly seeing that thoughtful adoption of the right things for the trial is going to give you a better trial and gives you the benefit of all the things that you need. And in some cases, it may be that in certain indications you use these 4 things, but in another indication you would use something else. And I think the data is going to drive that. And then and we are a notoriously hard field to do something new, right? Everybody just
100%.
just wants the trials to work well, and the element of something new isn't always like seen as a benefit, because what if that new thing is now the thing that tanks your study, so to speak, which it won't if the study is set up right, but that's what we're getting to, where now we really know how to do these things right. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that, because it is a very tough industry to innovate in, right? And there needs to be so much assurance, so much proof, so much, but, somebody's got to be first, and somebody, some company has to step into their courage and start, working in new ways, right? And so what do you say to clients who at this point are just reticent about, incorporating new technology, trying new ways of working? How do you deal with that?
So I think I wouldn't say that many people are reticent anymore. I don't think people are people know, like on some level, that this is how things are going to go, like that this is the way of the industry. And let me just give you some numbers around the innovation cycle in clinical research. Ken Getz from Tufts also did work on that, and it takes 7
with
years.
Avoca, by the way.
Yes, so did Avoca, yeah.
It's a joint collaboration with Tufts and
That
Avoca.
it takes 7 years from a pilot to adoption within a company,
right.
And it takes 20 years from the innovation to 60% adoption in the industry. So if we think back to EDC, to all those things that we've changed, that was not like,
I know.
None of this is overnight, right? So I think and even at City, it was interesting. A lot of people wanted to do different things when we had recommendations. So this is not even about buying something new. This is about doing something differently. There were always people who were like, you know what, we're willing to try that because we want to be sort of on the cusp of innovation. And then other people who then looked at that and needed examples of how they could adopt it, and that was better. So I think we're going to get into some, there's a groundswell of data coming in now that people are starting to look at. And the more that will happen, the more people that are maybe a little bit more on the fence are going to be willing to do it. But I think there's a lot of mandates now from executive teams to their product, to their compound teams to sort of go like, this is how you should be doing things. And some people are saying we'll start with 1 or 2 things, and other people are saying we'll do 1 trial and then expand from there. But I think.
Yeah, interesting. So do you think then that we're sort of at an inflection point with this as an industry? Because, personally, I've been impatient with the speed of adoption, and you could sort of see what's at stake, right? And the fact that clinical trials are very slow and inefficient, and there's technological interventions that actually could make a huge difference. So I've sort of seen this sluggishness, but what you're saying sounds pretty promising in a way, that companies aren't as reticent.
Well, I think there is people like you and I think we are very optimistic that things can be better. Like we wouldn't be doing what we've done in our work if we didn't think that things could be better.
That's true.
And interestingly...
But there is such a thing as irrational optimism.
Well, I don't think it's irrational. Yeah, I don't think it's irrational. If you look at other industries, we're just following other industries maybe a little slower. So I don't think it's irrational. Interestingly, even within a clinical trial, this became evident. We were once doing a clinical trial on intervention for acute myocardial infarction at the hospital I worked at. And people were like, no, we're giving, we need to give TPA, that is the standard of care. We don't want to do an acute intervention, which that became, practice of care at some point. And they were like, we just want to keep doing it the way we did. And I was like, you realized that for the TPA to be approved, you have to do something different at one point before that got approved. Like you can't just say we're going to keep doing it the way we're doing, because then you never improve. And there's this image of 2 like Flintstone type people pulling a cart with square wheels, and another person running behind and is saying a round wheel, and they're going like, this might be better. And and the guy's saying back, well, we're busy. We can't deal with that right now. So I think this is not new, but I think what I'm saying is that persistence. So we're optimists and persistent. Mm-hmm. So you need to be a bit of a dog with a bone, right? Over this, and any small, any victory is a good victory, and you just build upon things as you go. So I don't think I'm irrationally optimist. I think I'm realistically optimist. Yeah.
Yes. Well, that's great. And, I feel the same way that you really do have to have this stick-to-itiveness and persistence. And I also think that, like, if you are pursuing something that has like a noble purpose in terms of driving change and supporting patients, it sort of is a fuel, right? To keep you going, to address the barriers. I'm kind of curious now at Medable. Do you feel like you're still sort of in startup mentality of having to change and flex, and or are you in a steady state mode at this point?
I think we're definitely more in a steady state mode, and we just had a new release of the way we build things that is a leap forward from before with Medable Studio. So I think we've definitely gone through the startup motions of sort of inflection points in this, but I think we're
Right.
now on a clear path of where we think we need to be going. Yeah.
And how would you describe the main pain points that in the industry that Medable is addressing with your technology?
It's the same pain points that actually, frankly, started City to begin with the Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative, right? Enrollment is slower than expected. Timelines are
Right.
longer than you'd like it to be. All the things that we've been saying for the last 20 to 30 years, some of the emerging PAC data is showing that we're actually changing that. And that,
Hmm.
and some of the newer inflection points that we're addressing, which, 30 years ago, people were not quite talking about representative populations necessarily quite as much as they are now with the diversity action plans. But we're also seeing that that decentralized elements can actually help with enrolling a more diverse population because you give people different ways of being able to participate that don't require them to come sit at your site for 8 hours. We used to do studies when I was at Sarasota Memorial Hospital in acute exacerbation of COPD, and those people have to come sit there once a month for 8 hours because you have to do a pulmonary function test, dose them, and then do pulmonary function tests at different intervals. And looking back at it now, it was a very homogeneous population that participated. And in Florida, clearly, retired people, but,
Yeah.
retired white male people was our population. And thinking back, I'm sort of like, oh my God, I can't believe we didn't have other people. But the system didn't allow for other people to participate. And I think that's the beauty of DCTs is it really allows people to participate. It allows patients to participate from where they are. It allows sites that maybe are new sites to participate in different way. So I think there's always been this hurdle of finding a clinical trial and getting into a clinical trial. And I've helped many people find trials and they have to go fly to,
Yes.
wherever the site was. And now maybe you need to fly once or twice, but that's a very proposition then every month. So you can participate in things that before were not accessible to you, but now you can when you use decentralized elements. Or for example, my dad worked in supermarkets, so we were doing summer jobs as a cashier for like when I from 14 through my whole university years. And if you think about that job, I could not tell somebody, sorry, I've got to go do a clinical trial visit. I'll be back in 3 hours. I mean, that didn't quite
Right.
work. But maybe
Yeah.
now I can do assessments on my phone on my break, or I can do a televisit with somebody on my break. And so you open avenues that otherwise have not been able to.
Yeah, it's really a game changer in a way. And I think it's almost a paradox because there are patients who are really wanting to be in a trial and, needing to be in a trial, but yet there's a lack of access or there's a lack of awareness around trials. And I think it's a problem that is solvable, but it's still a problem.
It is. And
So
the one thing I want to mention now that you say that though is we have to think of the digital divide though as well, because not
true.
everybody has access to technology in the same
Yes.
way. And I just did a road trip last week to like West Texas and New Mexico, and you wouldn't believe the places where we had no reception. So
Yeah.
other things need to be in place. And I know broadband access was part of one of those things that were just legislated, one of those omnibus acts or something. I forget
Mm-hmm.
which one it was, but sort of those things are important too. People don't all have access to reliable internet and reliable, connections of Wi-Fi, leave alone access to maybe their own computer. We all know from COVID that 30% of kids never came on a computer. So you don't know if the parents was working on the computer and they couldn't get access during school or what it was. So there are other structural things that need to be in place for this to work. But I think the promise of it is really great. Yeah.
So, before we close, I want to talk a little bit about leadership. And I kind of think of leadership as a journey, that just personally, I'm always striving to be the best leader I can be. And I just wonder, when you think of yourself as a leader, what do you think you're really good at as a leader? And what are you working on?
I agree. I feel like I'm still sort of, I have little memos on my computer, don't do this. Like, because I know what I do.
Little reminders.
Little reminders. And one of them is don't interrupt people, because I know I get so eager to say something that I sometimes interrupt people. And I think it's also hard in a Zoom world because you don't always get the clues of when somebody's ending ending their sentence or ending what they're supposed to say. So I feel like I completely miss those and interrupt people, which I'm 100% all the time working on. I think what I'm good at is I really think as a leader, you need to enable your people to do the best job they can do. And you need to remove hurdles, work with them, also identify when there's things that aren't working. But I think being the biggest champion for your people is one of the things, because that's how we all got to the place we're at, right? Somebody was our champion at some point, and that you need that. I think I have a sense of urgency. I have a big sense of urgency. So, and I think that's how, I work off timeline. I'm a procrastinator too, but I have a sense of like I don't know how you married it too, but I feel like we just need to keep pushing at things. And one of the things I always think of is people overestimate what they can do in 1 year, but underestimate what they can do in 10. I think that's a Bill Gates quote, but it is so true. Like there's a sense of urgency and then the stick with us kind of situation.
Yes.
So I think that's I think what I'm good at. I like stick with it. One thing I really enjoy is when I talk to people and I hear them talk about things. I'm like, oh, you should talk to that person. Like you would do something together. So that's another part. I don't know that's leadership, but that's just something I really enjoy doing.
I like that too. Connecting people and just seeing what evolves from that. I'm part of a CEO group, and a big conversation in our group is just managing stress as leaders. And just wanted to ask you, how do you cope with stress, and what do you do just to kind of stay balanced?
I've always been a very active person. I've had an orthopedic issue that luckily I dealt with a year ago, and I'm sort of back to normal. So I'm working back up to working out regularly, which I couldn't do for a while. But I like to hike and I like to be outside. I think being outside, and I think there's the term nature bathing, like when you're between trees and
forest bathing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
I have a book called Forest Bathing. I don't have it with me, but
right, forest bathing, right? So I think that's what I like. I like to hug my dogs.
Pam, we're so much alike. I'm with you on that.
And hug my kids, but they're far away. My dogs are closer.
Yeah. So I guess just to wrap up, I'm just wondering, how do you see sort of our industry evolving and clinical trials evolving over the next 5 to 10 years? What's in store for us?
So I think there are so many things we need answers to in medicine, right? And clinical trials currently provide a good vehicle to do that. So one of my goals is to make, one of the reasons we want to make clinical trials more efficient is, yes, we want to get therapies to patients faster, wholeheartedly agree, super big part of the mission of Medable. But additionally, if we can make it more efficient, we can do more trials, which will help more patients. And then I think the one other part I'd like to see come together more, and I think with technology, there's a better chance of doing that too, is every medical interaction should inform, like be evidence for something else. So like we have currently the clinical research system with its own CRF on the side and its own data collection, and then the medical record. I love to see a world where those come much, much closer together so that maybe, it becomes faster. There's effectiveness data at the same time that there's efficacy data. And that's where we can crunch the timelines and answer more questions. I think that should be the goal of everyone working in clinical research, is get more answers to things that we need answers to. Yeah. For patients.
Agree.
Yeah.
And I guess my last question is, what do you want to be sort of remembered by? What do you want your legacy to be in the work that you do?
I think I'd like to be remembered for trying to do the right thing and like if we go on an evidence path, to go at the truth and to sort of not, the truth is what it is, and then we need to work with it. So if something doesn't work out quite the way we think it does, we need to know that, because we shouldn't continue doing that. And then we need to tweak it so that it becomes better. So I think being remembered for my integrity would maybe be my best reward.
Yes. Well, Pam, thank you so much. You have such an interesting background, and I got to ask you questions that I don't get to ask you when we see each other at conferences and things like that. So this was really fun for me.
Next time we meet, I'm going to ask you all these questions so that I know more about you.
I would love to talk with you about it. So thanks again.
Thank you.